To be white in so many ways is to be raised to be functionally illiterate on the topic of race. I am white, and part of being white is that I was not raised to see myself in racial terms. I mean, I understood that somebody had race, but not really me. To be white is to see oneself outside of race, to see oneself as a unique, special individual, exempt from the forces of socialization. I'll never forget a moment of standing beside a black man leading a workshop on race, and a white woman said to him, "I don't see color." He said, "Well, then how are you going to see racism? Because I am black. I do think you know that, and I have a different experience than you do. And you're not going to be able to understand that, and you're not going to be able to support the parts of that experience that are really painful and problematic if you refuse to acknowledge my reality." I don't see color is really a way of saying I refuse to acknowledge your reality. What's important about that narrative is it reveals what the person thinks racism is. So if the person is using proximity, fondness across race as evidence of a lack of racism, in order for that to be good evidence, a racist must not be able to do that. So that rests on an understanding that a racist cannot tolerate proximity to people of color. And I'm hoping that we can see that's pretty absurd, because trust me, even avowed racists can tolerate being around people of color, and often are. You cannot talk about any other issue without talking about how race informs that issue. And when someone says it's about class, that tends to function as a way to get race off the table. First of all, we're already divided by race. And focusing on race is not what did it. I would say not focusing on race, refusing to grapple with how race shapes virtually everything is what keeps us divided. And that is a very white narrative. All of those narratives function to get race off the table, close the exploration, exempt the person from any further engagement, and protect the racial hierarchy and the white position with it, which is an unequal hierarchy. The challenge I want to offer my fellow white people is changing the question from if to how. So dominant culture asks if I'm racist, and I want to change that question to how have I been shaped by the forces of racism? How is racism manifesting in my life? Because it circulates 24/7, 365. None of us can be, and none of us were exempt from its forces. And this is where individualism can come in. I have a particular story, but that story didn't exempt me. And so I can ask myself, how did all the things I see as unique about me set me up into the overall racist structure? Because it did.
I'm muted. I'm off of mute. Happy Saturday. How are you this Saturday? Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, and we're getting into the work of Dr. Robin DiAngelo surrounding white fragility. What is white fragility, and how has that affected white people? I started with that video because I wanted to give you a taste of Dr. Robin DiAngelo, what she's talking about, give you some background information about her as well, so you can kind of have an understanding of what we're getting into today, right? Because one part of this is looking at how people who view themselves as allies to Black Americans, how even if they have a misunderstanding of racism, using that or moving forward with that misunderstanding of the overall system of racism, how that can help to confuse them and help to hurt what we are doing. Because on one end, I'm giving her kudos for talking to white people about racism. I'm giving her kudos for doing her best to try to fight the system of racism. But on the other hand, I'm critiquing the information that she's given in her overall knowledge of racism to see if it's actually something that's realistic and effective and things that can be tangibly used to help effectively fight and break down the system of white supremacy. Because we don't want people just out here just talking to make themselves feel good about being a quote unquote ally to black people. We all know about the allies. Dr. John Henry Clark and other scholars have explicitly talked to us about our allies, right? So I believe we have to take a critical look, a very critical look, and examine the information that is given by those who say they are our allies, so we can have a clear understanding if they are actually helping the situation or hurting the situation, right? So a little more information about Robin DiAngelo. She has an academic career. So she is an affiliate associate professor of education at the University of Washington. She holds 2 honorary degrees. Her area of research is in whiteness studies and critical discourse analysis, tracing how whiteness is reproduced in everyday narratives. She is also a 2-time writer of the Student's Choice Award for Educator of the Year at the University of Washington School of Social Work. She has numerous publications and books, including Is Everybody Really Equal? An Introduction to Key Concepts in Critical Social Justice Education, co-written by Aslam Sensoy, which received both the American Educational Association Critics' Choice Book Award in 2012 and the Society of Professors of Education Book Award in 2018. In 2011, she coined the term, so she's the one who coined the term, white fragility, in an academic article which is influenced the international dialogue on race. Her book, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, was released in June of 2018 and debuted on the New York Times bestseller list, where it remained for over 3 years and has been translated into 13 languages. Her follow-up book, released on June of 2021, is Nice Racism: How Progressive White People Perpetuate Racial Harm. Interesting topic, right? Interesting topic. Her work or interviews have been featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, CNN, MSNBC, CBS, NPR, PBS, and the BBC, among many other outlets, right? In addition to her academic work, Dr. DiAngelo has been a consultant, educator, and facilitator for over 20 years on issues of racial and social justice. She has worked with a wide range of organizations, including private, nonprofit, and governmental. So kind of give you a background professionally of where Dr. Robin DiAngelo is actually coming from. But I actually want to, like I said, give her kudos for going out there and at least teaching or attempting to teach white people to be better. But also, let's take a critical look at this information and how does it really translate? Because I'm not saying I am the end all be all when it comes to information about race and racism, but I do know that I've studied enough and I continue to study racism enough, and I study our scholars enough to have a pretty good grasp on what racism is and how it has effectively been able to dominate the psyche, the mind, the spirit, the body, the soul of Black people or any other group of people that they choose to dominate. So we're going to get into it today. So remember, hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share. If you don't hit that like button, then you support all the bull that's going on. I'm just playing, but hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share. Make sure y'all support. And I want to give some shout outs real quick to people who continuously support this channel. So I want to give a huge shout out and a lot of love to me, Kim. I appreciate you, as well as Michael Anthony Clark Jr. I appreciate you too for your continued support of this channel. And remember, if you want to support this channel, all the information is in the description. You can do all of that. And you can become a member of the On the Shoulders of Giants channel as well. So check all of that out. So let's do this. We're about to get into it, listening to Dr. Robin DiAngelo's lecture on white fragility. And so I started where I started for a reason, because I want to get into this first graphic. So starting with this first graphic within her slide, and this is a point in the lecture where her microphone wasn't working very well, but started with this graphic on the slide. We're going to kind of move into it to where her mic still has a bit of issues in the beginning, but we're going to be able to hear her more and hear her clearer as she goes. But looking at this quote from Ijeoma Oluwo, if you don't understand, excuse me, I don't want you to understand me better. I want you to understand yourselves. Your survival have never depended on your knowledge of white culture. In fact, it's required your ignorance. I have pushback on that quote, on that statement. I have pushback on that. In my opinion, I believe from all the information that I've studied about racism and white culture and white supremacy and how they go about operating, defending, refining, continuing the system of racism, is dependent upon knowledge of white culture. It's dependent upon knowledge of white supremacy. It's dependent upon a great number of white people really understanding what white supremacy is, so it can continue, so the culture can continue to be passed down. Remember, Neely Fuller even talks about white supremacy as white people practice white supremacy as a religion. So thinking about it in that mindset of white people practicing white supremacy the same way that they would practice a religion. And so people pass down religious values, religious ideas, religious cultural traits. They are passed down from generation to generation. So that religion and what people find important and the values that come with that, people want those to continue. They want themselves to continue. They want the culture to continue. The same thing with the culture of white supremacy. It is passed down from generation to generation. The principles are passed down, right? The ideas are passed down. The advantages, the wealth, all of that is passed down from generation to generation. Am I saying all white people are racist? Am I saying all white people participate in the system of white supremacy? I'm not saying that, but we do know that all white people can benefit and do benefit from the system of white supremacy, especially if they put their best foot forward. They could benefit from the system of white supremacy, right? But it takes enough white people to understand their culture. We're the ones who don't understand the culture of white supremacy. We're the ones who don't. Because if we understood the system of white supremacy better, we will operate different. And one of my biggest grievances with this, or one of my biggest pet peeves with this, is two lanes that I see people always try to take to combat white supremacy. And I'm not saying that these lanes can't be taken, but these are two main lanes when you're trying to attack it from a moral sense and an intellectual sense. White supremacy don't give a damn about your morals. You cannot intellectualize yourself out of oppression. They didn't intellectualize us into oppression. They used force. They use cunningness, the strategies, the tactics. They use religion, they use deception, all these different things. But one of the greatest things that they used was force. And it was a combination of these things that were used to enslave us. Remember, we were enslaved mentally, physically, spiritually. So looking at the whole breadth of it, remember Neely Fuller's quote: if you don't understand racism, the system of white supremacy, anything else you seek to understand will only confuse you. And I believe a lot of us are confused. And also one of the things I push back on this, and she's going to get into it, it's like the idea of, because Black people have the lived experience that we have in America, that automatically means that we understand what racism and white supremacy is. And we all know that's not true. If so, the Neely Fuller quote wouldn't need to exist. Just because you experience racism and white supremacy every day doesn't mean you understand the system. you understand how you experience racism, white supremacy. But is that coupled with your full understanding of the system of white supremacy? What's going on, Aaron? Aaron says a mixed race. I can help you with a lot of this. Well, all we say is ask us the best way that you can help us. So that's a great way, is to ask us what is the best way you can help us, and whatever information that we give you, take that and use it. But be genuine, be real, tell the truth. Do not beat around the bush. If you don't really understand it, don't get up and start talking. And I'm not saying you don't understand anything, just overall for anybody. If you don't really understand what's going on, don't get up and start talking, because you're only going to confuse people even more. What's up, Tiffany? You already know what it is. I appreciate you. Hit that like button. She here. She is here. Hit that like button, please. But let's go ahead and get into it and learn more about what Robin DiAngelo is talking about when it comes to white fragility. And remember what I told you about the sound.
So this racism is arguably the most complex, nuanced social phenomenon of the last several hundred years. We will not solve it tonight. And there are myriad roads in, and all of them are important and critical. But there is a particular road in that is consistently left off the table, right? So whenever we have professional development or any kind of education or courses on racism or race relations, we tend to study them. And we learn about this group and this group and this group and their struggles and their triumphs and what we need to know when we're working with this group or that group. But what we rarely ever ask is struggles in relation to whom, right? Triumphs in relation to whom or what? Who am I as I interact across this racial difference? So dominant culture or whiteness is consistently left off the table. And that, again, is only one road in, but it is the road I'm going to take tonight. And so I want to position myself in this right away. I am white. Check me out, everybody.
For real.
And part of being white is drawing your attention to my race, like I did just now, goes against all my socialization. I was not raised to think of myself in racial terms. I understood that somebody had race, but not really me. And if we're going to be talking about race, we'd be talking about their race, not mine. I wasn't raised to see my race as significant to anything you could know about me. So what if I'm white, right? Well, I'm really clear today, after a good 20 years of day in and day out talking to people about race, I'm really clear I'm white. I have a white frame of reference, I have a white worldview, and I move through the world with a white experience.
And I get that. I get that. Her as an individual may not have been raised with that white frame of reference, that racial frame of reference, to understand you are a white person in America and whiteness is here and everything else is below whiteness. Yes, she may not have had that type of socialization, but what does that say for the masses? Because that's not true for the masses. The system, the culture, the religion of white supremacy, and I'm saying it like that for a reason. The system, the culture, and the religion of white supremacy is alive and well still today. So that means there's enough white people in America who are socialized through a white supremacist lens. So it's cool that she wasn't, but she has to also be able to fully understand that there's enough white people in America, even globally, there's enough white people globally who buy into and have been inculcated within the system of white supremacy and who practice it and pass it down generation to generation. They exist. That's why the system still exists today. So it's cool. You haven't been raised like that, but once you understand that, you have to teach it from that frame of reference and tell the truth, the whole truth. Don't omit nothing.
And it is not just a universal human experience, as I was taught to believe. It is most particularly a white experience in a society that is deeply separate and unequal by race. So while I'm always coming from that position and that perspective, I just want to be explicit about it tonight. And when I say we and us, I'm talking to the vast majority of people in this room and in any room, and certainly any room that has a table where decisions are being made that affect the lives of people who are not at that table. Right? So let me just say a little bit about what I hope will be valuable about this focus for the people of color here tonight. First of all, what I hope will be valuable is that I'm going to name and admit to things in my short period of time in front of you that white people will rarely ever name or admit to. And if you've ever scratched your head wondering, how do they pull this off? Can they really not see this?
In her admission, I hope something is actually learned, something tangible and valuable is actually learned and applied by those who are in the crowd, because this is more than just her making herself feel good about talking to white people about racism. Because, you know, the white women like to act like they're the ones who can wave their fingers at white supremacy, because they act like white women had nothing to do with white supremacy. And we calling that out today too. White women are just as complicit in the system of white supremacy as white men. They are not absent of the guilt. They have blood on their hands as well. They help pass the culture down. They help to reinforce it. The white men are the muscle, and the white women are the nurturers of the system of white supremacy. Let's not forget that.
And why are they so resistant to seeing this? I will help you with that, because you have to navigate my reality on a daily basis in a way that I'm really sorry to say, I can be seen as qualified to lead virtually anything with no understanding whatsoever of your reality. And to be really honest, no interest in understanding that reality. And so I hope that
that's called dominance. That's called white supremacy. That's called dominance. They're able to create the narrative. They're able to create the environment and control the environment. That is called dominance. But until we as Black people do something different, rise up, this dominance won't stop, right?
that is useful to you with the gaslighting that happens so often. I also want to acknowledge that so much of what I can articulate today about what it means to be white rests on years and years of brilliant and patient mentorship from people of color. People of color have been saying what I'm going to say tonight for hundreds of years at this point. And unfortunately, one of the dynamics of implicit bias is if you are white, whether you're aware of it or not, you're a little more likely to be a little more open to hear it from me.
And I don't think white people are afraid to talk about racism. Not in the manner in which it will help to end the system of racism. They're not afraid to talk about that. It doesn't serve their interest. Why would a group of white supremacists sit around and talk about the best ways to end white supremacy? Why would they talk about race in a way that will help to improve race relations if they are practicing white supremacists? That is not what they would do. That will only be relegated to white people who are dedicated fully to replacing the system of white supremacy with the system of justice. But in my opinion, I believe there's a large number of white people in America and globally who practice the system of white supremacy, who support the system of white supremacy. Them talking about race in a manner that will improve race relations does not help them. It does not help to further the system of white supremacy. They won't talk about that. That is only relegated to white people who are, if you're a white person who's afraid to talk about the system of white supremacy, that's because you probably one of those fake fence riders, those fake allies, right? Like you're the person who's a racist, but you're afraid to be racist out in public. You know, I'm from the South. I'm from Tallahassee, Florida. I'm from the South. I'm used to seeing the Ku Klux Klan in real life. And yes, I have seen the Ku Klux Klan in real life multiple times. I like my racism out front because I'm from the South. I'm different. I'm not saying everybody should like yours like that. That's how I like my racism. Out in front. Let me know who you are so I can stay away from your ass.
And so if I can use this position in this way to break with white solidarity, I'm going to use it. Okay? And that invokes the master's tools dilemma, right? As I think that Darlene referred to, right? How do you challenge the master's house when you only have the tools of that house, when you're in the house? So I want to be really clear that I am aware that as I stand on this stage with credibility and authority granted to my voice on racism, no less, like virtually every other teacher or professor or role model or authority figure, I am reinforcing the centrality of whiteness. I want to name that. And trust me, I've gone home many a night and tossed and turned over that. Where I always land is that it is a both end, right? To not use this position in this way, for me, is to really be white. And I'd like to be a little less white. Right? And a little less white, by the way, does not mean a little more Italian American. Okay? It means a little less oppressive, quite frankly, a little.
To say a little less white, I guess you really want to say you don't want to be a white person. Your support of white supremacy should not be as great if you are learning to not be a white supremacist, your support of the white supremacist system. And one of the things also is that word white supremacy has to be used. Let's not beat around the bush. Use the word white supremacy so we know what we're talking about exactly. Whiteness in relation to whiteness, because you're not going to stop being white. You're not going to be a little less white, but you don't have to support the system of race, the system of white supremacy. You could be a full white person who's proud of being white, but you don't support the system of white supremacy. Don't come off as the white person who's, I'm not proud of being white. You ain't trying to be nothing else, and you can't be nothing else. You have no choice but to be a white person, but you don't have to be a white person who supports the system of white supremacy.
A little less oblivious and arrogant and ignorant and certain, and a little more humble and curious and vulnerable, right? The last thing that I want to acknowledge is that nothing in society gives any of us good information about how this works. And so hopefully, again, as an insider, I can offer something to people of color. I do think people of color know about white fragility way more than I ever will. But again, I do have an insider's perspective.
I disagree with that. Just because you're Black and just because you experience the variety of levels of white supremacy that we can experience as Black people doesn't mean we really understand white fragility. You just made it up. You made it up when you wrote your book, White Fragility. We've never heard of it. Now, we do know about the white sympathizers, or the white, I would call the white pretenders, right? The white people who, or the liberal whites that Malcolm X talked about, who are pretending to be your friend in your face, and behind your back, they're working to continue the system of white supremacy. We do know about that, if you want to call that white fragility, but that doesn't really line up with your definition of white fragility, of white people being afraid to actually confront racism and confront the system of white supremacy, because these people don't actually want to confront the system of white supremacy. They just understand that out in the open, it's not in their best interest to be racist. They get that. The system of white supremacy has refined itself over the years, and it's not conducive for the masses of white people to continue in a specific manner. They have to refine it. So if they refine it, it can continue. That's what we're dealing with, the refinement of white supremacy, the hiding of it, the liberalization of it, because we know about all of our so-called liberal allies.
So let me say a little bit about some of the challenges of trying to educate white people on racism. And a great example is I was recently going to give a similar talk to a large tech company, and before they would sign the contract, the legal department wanted to see my slides. And when they got to this slide, they actually asked me if I could take the word white off the slide. To which I replied, you really should have vetted me before you called. No, I won't. All right. First of all, I've never met a white person who doesn't have an opinion on racism. Have you? If you are not sure all white people have an opinion on racism, just bring it up the next time you're around a bunch of white people. Maybe tonight when you have a drink in Noe Valley.
Everybody has.
Okay.
Everybody in America has an opinion on racism. Race is something that is put on the forefront in America. So everybody in America has an opinion on racism. But that doesn't mean, just like a slide say, that doesn't mean that your opinion is informed. Even for us, even for Black people, that doesn't mean that our opinion is informed. So as a white person who wants to be an ally, you can't just find random Black person and use that Black person as the measure for what, or the end all be all, or the authority on what racism, white supremacy is. Does that Black person really understand the system of white supremacy themselves? Have they studied it? And if they haven't, they're just as clueless as any other person from any other race.
I don't think you can grow up in this society or spend any significant time here or any other Western-oriented white settler colonial context and not develop an opinion on racism. That doesn't make it informed. So I'm going to say perhaps my first controversial thing. If you are white, I'm sure you have an opinion on the topic, and I don't know virtually anyone in this room. And yet I am confident to say the following. If you are white and you have not devoted years of sustained study, struggle, and focus on this topic, your opinions are necessarily limited, superficial, and uninformed. Wow, how can I say that when I don't even know you? I mean, maybe you've been to Costa Rica. Maybe you have multiracial nieces and nephews.
But she's also hinting at the, I guess, learning about racism via the academic institutions versus learning about racism via interacting with actual people in real life and really letting those people teach you about their experiences. But that has to be coupled with, so I agree with her in some part, because the actual experiences that people have needs to be coupled with a true understanding of the system of white supremacy. But she has to also understand that her arrival to her conclusions and her information about racism and white supremacy is also very theoretical, because she got her degrees from the University of Washington too. So it's very, very, very theoretical.
Maybe you were in Teach for America. I can say it because nothing in dominant culture gives us the information we would need to have an informed opinion on arguably the most complex, nuanced social dilemma for the last several hundred years. For example, you can get through graduate school in this country without ever discussing racism, can you not?
Duh. Tell us something we don't know. Tell us something we don't know. Why? Because we live in a country where the system of white supremacy reigns supreme. How is it conducive to the system of white supremacy to make sure everybody knows Black history? It's not. So it's not. And I get it. She's talking to white people, but one of my critiques of this is tell the full truth. Hey, it's not going to be taught in these schools. You can graduate, you can be a Black person in America, go to an HBCU and graduate from that HBCU with a master's and a PhD and learn nothing about your own history and culture. You can do that at an HBCU. So tell the full truth. It's a systematic reason why any person in America can graduate from a university and learn nothing about Black history. It's not conducive for the system of white supremacy for that Black person or any other person to learn Black history. It's not conducive. Tell the why behind it and be honest about it.
You can get through teacher education in this country without ever discussing racism. And if you're in a progressive teacher education program, you'll have one required course, multicultural of some sort. But that doesn't mean you'll be discussing racism. You might just be talking about how to introduce ethnic authors in February. Okay? You can get through law school. You can be seen as qualified to lead anything virtually, right? So the first challenge for those of us who are white is humility. I want you to know that I'm not standing in front of the choir right now. Even if you volunteered to come, there is no white choir. I am not the choir. And the moment I think I'm the choir, I'm going to be complacent and arrogant and probably defensive about any suggestion that I might not be as much of the choir as I think that I am. Right? Second challenge is that if I do a good job, this won't be comfortable, particularly for the white people in the room, for the whole time. The status quo is racism. And as a white person, that's comfortable for me virtually 24/7. So I'm not here to uphold that. I want to unsettle that because we will not get where we need to go from a place of white comfort. The key is what we do with those moments of discomfort if I manage to stimulate them. We can certainly use them as a way out. We can also ideally use them as a relatively rare way in. Why does this unsettle me? What would it mean if it were true? And there are two places where white people begin to get uncomfortable when I give a talk, whether you can consciously articulate it to yourself or not. The first place is how often I'm going to say the word white. So prepare yourself, about 100 times. And we're not used to being seen racially. Right? We're not used to having people proceed as if our race has meaning. And the second place where we can begin to get uncomfortable is that I am going to challenge the very precious ideology of individualism. And I'm going to do it by generalizing about white people all night long. And you're going to be just fine. Okay? It is a very precious ideology. In general, I'm talking about the white collective, we don't like to be generalized about. And so just so you know, if I thought it was racist to generalize about white people, I wouldn't do it, so you don't have to send that email. You can actually ask yourself, well, might I be missing something if I don't understand it, right? Rather than she must be doing that wrong, okay? Yes, we are individuals, of course, and I couldn't possibly hold every person's story in this room, even if I wanted to. We are also members of a social group. By virtue of our membership in this social group, we could literally predict whether you and your mother were going to survive your birth, regardless of your age. We can predict how long you're going to live because you're a member of this social group. There's a collective experience to being white. There are shared messages. We are all swimming in the same water, right? And just like gender, the way you respond to gender socialization, your challenges to gender socialization, you may have them, there's variations, but nobody can avoid dealing with gender socialization and responding to it. It is the same with racial socialization, right? So every moment that you want to exempt yourself, try this. All right, she's saying most white people X. I was a Y. Okay, good for you. Okay, you were Y. Most are X. How did Y set you up into the racial hierarchy you live in, swim in, grew up in, breathe in, right? It set you up differently than X set me up, but we both got set up. It's on you to use everything you see as unique about yourself and figure out how it set you up rather than exempted you. And finally, we don't tend to understand the systemic nature of racism. So let's just start there, and I'm going to do this the way that I always do this to explain the difference between personal prejudice that everybody has and systemic racism. So prejudice, prejudgment, everyone has it. There is no human objectivity. We get it from everywhere across our lifespans. Most of it is not conscious. I would highly suggest, and I think it's being sold out there, Dr. Jennifer Eberhard's new book, Biased, where she pulls together all the research, and the research is clear. All of us have prejudice. I'll use the term bias, and most of it is implicit or unconscious.
I'll never believe that white supremacists, like actual practicing white supremacists, are just walking around oblivious to the system of white supremacy, oblivious to how racism works, oblivious to the actions and the and the effects of white supremacy, especially if the whole goal is to continue the system, if the whole goal is to remain dominant, if the whole goal is to make sure that other groups of people never reach the level that they are. If that whole goal is in place, it's impossible for practicing white supremacists to walk around oblivious about what's going on, what they're doing, and how they're affecting others negatively. It's deliberate actions. Remember, the culture, the system, and the religion of white supremacy is passed down from generation to generation, so it can be continued. Don't let nobody fool you. White people are not walking around here. White supremacists are not walking around here oblivious to what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They know how they were socialized. They know what they were taught. They were nurtured on the teats of white supremacy. It's in them. They understand it. Don't let them fool you now.
Okay? And therefore, all of us act on it. The way you see the world drives the way you respond to the world. Right? So everybody has it, everybody does it. But when you back one group's collective racial bias with legal authority and institutional control, it is transformed.
That means you know what you're doing. Those are deliberate actions. You're proving my point right there, Dr. Robin. You're proving my point. Those are deliberate actions. If you legalize the discrimination, you legalize the racism, those are deliberate actions. They didn't just stumble into the legalization of it. They sat down, thought about it, implemented it, and made it happen and made it stick and was able to benefit off of it. Those are deliberate actions. Tell them that. Don't tell those other white people that, oh, well, they just meandered themselves into this. No, no, no. These were deliberate actions.
Into a far-reaching system that becomes the default. It becomes automatic. It's not dependent on your friendliness or your good intentions, right? So it gets embedded in all the institutions and also in cultural definitions of what's even normal, right?
She's proving my point even more about the culture and the religion of white supremacy, and how if it's embedded in cultural definitions of what is normal, real, correct, beautiful, and valuable, you didn't just stumble into that. You're proving my point, Robin, but you were saying it in a way to try to remain safe. So that's why I'm side-eyeing you. And that's why, as this wasn't even going to be my video for today, but I kept watching it. I kept watching this for some reason, because it didn't sit right with me. And if you're going to teach white people how to not be racist and how to fight the system of white supremacy, you got to understand that yourself. And in my opinion, she don't understand the system of white supremacy like she thinks she does. She believes she understands what white supremacy is, how it works. I disagree, because listening to her, either that or she's just totally disingenuous. But hey, you know.
What is professionalism? What is intelligence? Whose stories are told? By whom? Whose stories are not told, right? And I'm going to use an example from one form of oppression to launch us into the form we're here to talk about tonight. So we're here to talk about racism. I'm very clear you can't really separate these out. But for our purposes, we're going to take a focused look on racism. But I'm going to draw from an example from the form called sexism. And relax, I'm going to use dominant language, because I'm going to use this the way our textbooks teach us. Right? So hang in there.
See, this when she finna get on some more of that bull. Trying to remove the white woman's role from the system of white supremacy. Nope, not gonna happen on my watch.
Women got the right to vote in this country in 1920. There was only one possible way that women could get the right to vote, and that was for men to give it to us.
And Black people still didn't have basic human rights in 1920. Black people in America did not have basic human rights in 1920 when white women got their right to vote. The system of white supremacy, which includes men and women, still oppressed and still is oppressing Black people.
Women couldn't vote on the right to vote. They couldn't even speak in many public forums to advocate for their right to vote.
white women could own slaves. White women could own slaves. They couldn't vote, but they could own slaves. Ooh, we can vote, but y'all own us. Say that. Talk about that as well.
Could a woman be prejudiced against a man and mean to him in a one-on-one interaction? Of course. Could women as a group literally deny every single man in the society his civil rights? No.
White women can do that to black men. White women with the collective force of white women backed by the collective force of white men could deny black men all of their rights. White women can do that.
No. Could men deny every woman in the society her civil rights? Yes. And that is a significant difference that must be acknowledged in language, right?
And remember, sorry to keep pausing, but it's she done got me going. Remember, this patriarchal system, like the system of white supremacy, it needs the involvement of its women for the culture to be passed down from generation to generation. So if white women don't buy into and support and help nurture and pass down this white patriarchal system, it wouldn't still exist. White women are just as complicit in the patriarchy and the system of white supremacy as white men. She needs to say that. Stop just trying to put it off on white men and make sure you involve or include all of the actions of white women and what they was doing to help back up the white man and keep the system of white supremacy going. Why are you leaving that out? Why are you trying to make it seem like it was only the white men? No, it wasn't. That white man's mother was racist as well. He was nurtured by the teats of white supremacy. Miss me with all that male stuff, just trying to be male centric. No, white women were just as complicit as the white men.
Right. So think about today. In 2019, I'm going to offer you a question. Today, if men as a group wanted to take away our right to vote, could they?
Yep.
Now, that's a little easier to see today than it was about 10 years ago when I first started asking this question. But I have been asking this question for many years because this is the best example of the difference between individual prejudice and institutional power, when yours is backed. And most people, when I offer that question, there's confusion, they're not so clear. Some people are sure that they could, some are not, which is also part of how oppression works. So let me just show you some basic statistics from 2019. The Fortune 500 CEOs are 98% male. The 10 richest Americans are all men. 7 of them are the richest people in the world. I think economic power is probably the ultimate form. The presidency and the vice presidency has always been 100% male. The Senate, keep in mind, we're celebrating the most diverse Senate Congress we've ever had. 75% male, House of Representatives, 70% male, the current cabinet, 84% male, US mayors, 80% male, US governors, 84% male, federal judges, 87% male, police officers, 85% male.
I guarantee you 85 to 90% of those white men or white males she's talking about are married to a white woman, which means white women still benefit directly from the dominance of white men. And then let's talk about how white women been dominating black women. White women have basically been wiping their butts with the souls of black women since we got here. And we keep trying to act like they've been our allies. She's speaking as if she's from a historical ally standpoint. No, tell the full truth. That's my problem with this. And there might be some people who disagree with me. Cool, but this is me. This is what I'm gathering from this. It's disingenuous. You're not telling the full truth. You got to talk about that. Talk about white supremacy as a full system. Don't just talk about white supremacy from one end. What did white women do as well?
So just ask you again, if they wanted to. I'm not saying they would. My point is, by definition, institutional power is deeply embedded in the fabric of society. It's embedded across history. These are not flexible systems. Heads up, we live in patriarchy. We live in an androcentric, male-dominated
We live in white supremacy. We live in white supremacy, which is propped up by both white men and white women. Yeah, Robin.
Patriarchal society. We always have, and it didn't end in 1920.
And the patriarchal system is also supported by both white men and white women. Robin.
I'm very confident that if Hillary Clinton had become president, patriarchy wasn't going to end that day anymore. I mean, if the word patriarchy came out of her mouth, any more than we can see that racism did not end upon Obama's presidency. I would argue it got an infusion. All systems of oppression can allow for exceptions. The rule will be consistent.
I agree.
2019. And just in case you need a visual on my claim that we live in patriarchy, this is the House Freedom.
I guarantee you all these men, or the majority of these men, are married to white women. And these white women and their white families and all the other white kids and stuff directly benefit from the dominance of these white men.
Caucus. This is arguably the most powerful committee in the nation. Talk about making decisions at the table that will affect the lives of people who are not at that table. They're literally discussing the healthcare bill when this picture was taken. Right? In case you need an image from popular culture, this is cover of Vanity Fair. This is a slide I made. I don't even know who it is. I just Googled white guy. And I got this, and I thought, oh, that's a good one. If you have young people in your life, and if you have kind of self-awareness yourself, you know that children are deeply shaped by films, by media, by imagery and marketing, right? The way that they think about the world and understand the world. And all of us pretty much have been deeply shaped by film. Those who write and direct film are our cultural narrators, and they shape how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves in relation to other people. And of the 100 top grossing films of all time across the world disseminated from the US, 99 were directed by men. And 95 of them white. Institutional power is the ability to disseminate your worldview to everyone.
She's being a bit disingenuous as well because she's only looking at male-dominated spaces. So there are female-dominated spaces as well. There are industries where women vastly outnumber men and vastly outperform men in those realms. So I'm not saying that there's that the categories or the realms that women dominate far exceed men, far outweigh the number of industries that men dominate. I'm not saying that, but I am saying you do have to show the full picture. You can't just show a portion of it because that's the slant to it, right? And that's what makes it disingenuous. That's the slant. Men dominate most of these industries, but these are a lot of male-dominated industries. Because she made me think about like looking at the NBA versus the WNBA, and the idea is the NBA is supported more because of patriarchy. Well, no, women aren't interested in mass and basketball like that. They don't dominate this industry, but there are industries where women do dominate. So at least show that, say, hey, these are the industries that the males dominate, but women do have these industries that we dominate. And if you look at those, most of the women who dominate those industries are what type of women? What racial classification? White women. So white men and white women both dominate the majority of these labor industries. White supremacy as a whole.
Everyone. And to shape how they see themselves, how they see you, how they see themselves in relationship to you. To tell the story of the other, when you are not in relationship with the other, when you don't know the other, to be able to represent the other and to do it and position yourself as simply telling universal human stories, not from any particular position. So that Mike Lee is a film director who makes films about the human condition, and Spike Lee is a Black film director who makes films about Black issues. So Facebook puts these things out on holidays. This one came out to commemorate the anniversary of women gaining suffrage. And then some folks did this. Which women got access to the vote in 1920? Yeah, white women. So another dimension of institutional power is that your group's experience is held up as universal. So while we were oppressed as women, we were certainly privileged as white. There is no more universal woman's experience than there is a universal human experience on the physical plane where we live in the here and now. Right? And that recognition, I'm sure many of you know, was termed by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality. Right? All right, so legal authority.
No, you only got one slide. Come on, Robin. You only got one slide on that. You're just gonna briefly touch on it, Robin. You're just gonna briefly touch on the advantages white women get over all other women, especially black women, and how white women have been using the souls of black women as their tissue since black women got here. You just gonna briefly discuss it. You spent a couple slides on the patriarchy. You're gonna briefly discuss this? No, tell the full story of how white women been about that bullshit too.
And institutional control is what transforms people's prejudice into a far-reaching system. So let's look at race in 2019, right? So the presidency and vice presidency, 100% white. The US Senate, 91% white. I just have to point out again, the most diverse Congress we've ever had. The House of Representatives, 73% white. The current cabinet, 89% white. The governors, 98% white. Mayors, 88% white. Military advisors, just think about who we go to war with. 100% white. Federal judges, 88% white. Police officers, 80% white. The people who decide which TV shows we see, 93% white. The people who decide which books we read, 90% white. People who decide which news is covered, 85% white. People who decide which music is produced, 95% white. School teachers, 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of men's pro football teams, 97% white. Owners of men's pro basketball teams, 98% white. The players, 75% black. Right? And yet, what is the definition of a racist, of what it means to be racist in the mainstream? Right? Well, it's an individual, always an individual, not a system, who consciously does not like people based on race. Apparently, if it's not conscious, it doesn't count. And is intentionally mean to them. It also has to be intentional to count. Individual, conscious, malintent across race. That is a racist. And I don't know that you could come up with a better definition to protect the system of racism than this one. Because this definition makes it virtually impossible to talk to the...
I could think of something, trying to act like white women have always been an ally to black people is another thing that helps further the system of white supremacy. It also protects white supremacy, trying to act like white women didn't own slaves, like white women didn't brutalize slaves, like white women have just from the beginning been these allies to black people and been fighting the system of white supremacy in mass. That's another thing that helps to protect the system of white supremacy, to only point the finger at the white man. No, white man, woman, and child.
The average white person about the inevitable absorption of a racist worldview that we get from living in a culture in which it is infused and embedded across all its institutions, right? I think that this definition is the root of virtually all white defensiveness on this topic. Have you guys noticed any white defensiveness on this topic? Because if that's my definition of a racist, and you've just suggested I've said or done something racist, much less that I benefit from racist just by being white, what I'm going to hear is you just question my very moral character. And now I need to defend my moral character, right? And I will, right? So racism is a system, not an event. It certainly occurs in specific moments that we can identify, but of course it's 365, 24/7. It's the system we're in.
I can't even say that name, but I wonder where they got that definition from.
And part of being raised as a white person in this society has been to be raised to be what I think of as functionally illiterate on this topic. I had opinions, I spouted them freely. I cringe today when I think about that. And part of gaining literacy, and of course that is a lifelong process I will not be finished with, part of gaining literacy has been to understand the kind of collective dimensions of racism, but also how different groups of color get set up differently. So what's in my head about indigenous peoples is different than what's in my head about Asian heritage people, and that's different than what's in there about African heritage people. I have different levels of comfort and anxiety and interest, etc. And therefore, those groups have different experiences. Okay? And it's very important that we break that down and that we learn those histories and those struggles and those stereotypes and those experiences. So I want to be really clear. All peoples who are not perceived or defined as white experience racism. And they experience it in shared ways, and they experience it in ways that are different depending on their group and its position to whiteness. Having said that, after 20 years of doing this work, I feel very clear about the following. There is something profoundly anti-Black in this culture. And in the white mind, Black people are the ultimate racial other. We have the most energy about Black people. We have the most resentment.
Well, that's because Black people, especially when we're talking about the continent of Africa, Black people have the resources that white people need to maintain their dominance, maintain their wealth. White people need us to remain at a very subservient, very oppressed position so they can continue extracting the resources, whether it's human resources or it's the natural resources out of the ground. Black people and the land of Black people have always been exploited by the white supremacists. It's always been exploited. And Black people will continue to be warred upon. Let's use that word. Black people will continue to be warred upon because that's how white people maintain their dominance and maintain the resources and the wealth that they had. How did white supremacy come to be what it is? What drives the white supremacists? What's the initiator of it? How did we get here? Remember, Europe was poor. We're reading about this on Mondays. We're reading Dr. John Henry Clark, Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, right? We're reading about this and we're learning that Europe was poor after the Crusades, after all of the internal battles and the plague and everything that has happened in Europe. Europe was poor. So Europe wanted to enrich themselves. Europe wanted power. Europe wanted money, land, power, and resources. Remember, white supremacy, all of the actions that we attribute to the definition of racism, all of those actions were in place before a defined concept of race and racism was around. The system of white supremacy and slavery predates the ideas of race and racism. White supremacy comes first. They were already dominating African people. They were already dominating Caribbean people. They were already dominating non-white people. The idea or the main objective was to go to Asia and dominate those Asian people, but Columbus got lost, ended up in the Caribbean, and they started dominating those people because they realized they had human resources and the resources that they can get out of the ground, right? So why did white supremacy happen? We have to understand that money, power, land, resources. Money, power, land, resources. Racism was created to justify the actions of the white supremacists. Well, we're doing this to these beings because they're not human, they're subhuman. And we can prove that they're subhuman with our flawed science, not flawed psychology, not flawed phrenology, and all these social sciences or these soft sciences that were developed out of experimenting upon Black people to try to justify all of the actions of the white supremacy, which was already in motion before a defined concept of race, which came about in the 1600s, which was more crystallized in the 1800s. We talked about this. Go watch the previous videos. We've talked about this before. Tell the full truth.
And anxiety about Black people. And when I have a very short period of time with white people, and I want you to get in touch with your early messages, I ask you to think about Black people, right? And anti-Blackness, there are poles, right? White is here and Black is here. And I don't have time to get into it, but there is no white without Black. There's a deep need for white, the white collective. There is no superiority without inferiority, right? So there are poles. And anti-Blackness cuts across all groups, including Black people.
Because all groups have benefited off of the exploitation of Black people. Once again, we have no friends. All other groups have benefited off of exploiting Black people.
The darker you are, the more compounded the oppression. And while I'm here to challenge white people in our complacency, there's a very sensitive couple questions I think peoples of color have to ask themselves. One, what does anti-Blackness look like in our group, and who have I aligned with? Right?
We know who you're aligned with. We know who they've aligned with. Them, like all other groups of color, the fake BIPOC stuff have always aligned themselves with white supremacy for the proximity of whiteness that they can, so they can, benefit from having this proximity to whiteness. We know this. And if you don't know this, you are learning this.
In history, anti-Blackness, it's a system. I want to just give you one glance at the trajectory of anti-Blackness since the beginning of this country to the current time to illustrate those points. And this slide will be deliberately dense, and we can think about it as state-sanctioned organized crime, quite frankly.
So let's rephrase that. So collective white supremacy, which is backed by legal authority and institutional control. State-sanctioned white supremacy prevailing over African Americans. White supremacy is the word and that's one of my issues. Let's stop beating around the bush in this. Let's stop trying to make it nice. Hey, white people, if you're gonna good up the hey, white people, we support the system of white supremacy. We have been supporting this system of white supremacy from the beginning. We're not using the word prejudice or discrimination or all these white supremacy. We've been conditioned and acculturated to support and prop up the system of white supremacy. She should be saying that.
Frankly, against African Americans. And it begins with kidnapping and 300 plus years of enslavement, torture, rape, and brutality, and it carries on. About 1/4 of the way in here, bans on testifying against whites, and you are in my lifetime. 1/4 of the way in that slide, you are in my lifetime where it was technically legal to murder Black people in this country. I would love to never again hear another white person say I didn't own slaves, as if that ended on that day. And about halfway in at employment discrimination, you are now in 2019 with copious empirical evidence. And if you don't know some of these things, that's on you to educate yourself. But I'm going to pick it up in 2019, and let me repeat, copious empirical evidence. Employment discrimination, educational discrimination, bias laws and policing, white flight, subprime mortgages, mass incarceration, school to prison pipeline, disproportionate special education referrals and punishments, testing, tracking, school funding, biased media, voter suppression, cultural mockery, historical omissions, unaddressed trauma, to name a few. It's a system. It's the system we're in, and none of us could be and none of us were exempt from its forces. And this system is not interrupted by friendliness. The system is not interrupted because I smile at Black people when I pass them by or go to lunch on occasion. And African Americans are not and have never been in the position to do this to the entire white collective, and the white collective has always been and continues to be in the position to do this to African Americans. There is no such thing as reverse racism. Okay?
So I am, for the sake of time in my day, I am going to stop that right there. But I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Remember, hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share. You can do super chat. You can become a member. There are various ways to support this channel. Thank you to everybody who's been supporting the channel. Me, Kim, thank you for your support. Make sure I get all my names correct. Michael Anthony Clark Jr., thank you for your support, for your continued support to this channel. So all in all, my beef and my gripe is, first of all, if you're going to stand up in front of others and talk about white supremacy, racism, don't be afraid to say what it is: white supremacy, racism. Also, if you're going to stand up in front of a group of people and talk about the system of white supremacy and racism, make sure you understand the system of white supremacy, racism, and how it affects others systematically overall in all 9 areas of human activity, right? We're talking about what it is: labor, law, politics, education, entertainment, economics, labor, law, politics, sex, religion, war/counter-war. How does white supremacy affect all those 9 areas of human activity? Why has it affected all those 9 areas of human activity? Why does it still continue to affect all those areas, all those 9 areas of human activity? Who have been the main contributors to the system of white supremacy? See, when we start asking questions like that, we get to the nitty-gritty, right? Because if you're going to be an ally and tell the whole truth. Don't be finger pointing. Well, the white men only one did it. It was only the white men. It's the white, white people. Because at times, she threw in the white people. She talked about white people as a whole. She skimmed over white women's role in this. She dedicated several slides to the patriarchy and skimmed over one slide of white women's role in this. Lady, sit your butt down, stop writing books, sit your butt down, and go really learn about the system of white supremacy, racism. I understand you got your degrees from the University of Washington and all that, but I challenge all of that. Go learn from the Black scholars. Go get the real scholars to really teach you about what racism means, because she understands it from a theoretical standpoint. Right? Of, well, this is what white supremacy is, and hey, also because I'm a white woman, I'm exempt from the accountability of white supremacy, because it was the patriarchy that did it. It wasn't us. It was the patriarchy. Bull, lady, sit down. Sit down. Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate you. Thank you. Tiffany, well, you already know. You know what I'm saying? So I haven't read the book either, but I am going to get the book and read it, because no, Tiffany, nope. Dr. John Henrik Clarke was very, very adamant about us reading everything. Get the book, read it, so you can understand fully what she's talking about, especially if she's going to be someone who calls herself an ally out here teaching white people about racism. We need to understand how she thinks and what she's coming from. Get the book, read it, study it, so we can counter all the bull that's out there. Hey, but remember, going back to what I said in the beginning, a great way for white people or all other non-Black people who want to help fight the system of white supremacy, who want to align themselves with us truly, a great way to start is asking us, what's the best way I can help? And let us tell them how they can best help. Let us educate them. She got an education from the University of Washington. We don't know. She fancies herself as an anti-racist expert. I say, She know a little bit. She knows some surface level stuff, but I say she's still confused. And then she's out there confusing others. That's me from my standpoint. You can call me an armchair person, all you. Hey, I take that. It's cool, whatever. But is what I'm saying making sense? Is it lining up? And if it's lining up, then hey, I got a point. But I'm not saying I'm the end all be all when it comes to this information. I'm not saying I am the scholar. I'm a brother who've done over 20 years of study. I'm a brother who has studied at the feet of master Black psychologists. I just went to an event this morning, and I can't remember Dr. Brown. Can't remember his first name, but Dr. Brown, Black psychologist, listening to him, and we had a brief exchange. Me and him talked to him about my journey and everything. But I have enough knowledge and information, and I continue to study it enough to know that some things are missing from what she's saying, right? So Sandra says she read her book and had a problem with it. So, and what was funny you say that. In preparing for this video and getting more information about Robin DiAngelo and seeing what others thought about her book, I seen both Black and white people slamming her book. So y'all hit that like button. Just like Tiffany said, thank you for supporting. Hit that like button. And remember, when you come on my stream, I want to remind y'all every weekend, every Saturday, 3:30, unless I got something going on, I'll let you know. But every Saturday at 3:30, if you have something going on, you got a YouTube channel, you wrote a book, whatever you have, you got a youth organization, you do plumbing, you make shoes, put your links in the description. I mean, put your links in the comments so I can share them on the screen, because one of the things we want to do is build a community of people who can help each other. And we want to be able to support everybody that got something going on. So Tiffany, you already know, put your YouTube handle in the comments. If you got a YouTube channel, whatever you got, a radio show, podcast, I don't care what you do. If you dig ditches, put that information in the comments, put your links, put your websites, put all that in the comments so we can support each other, because that's what we're here to do, build real communities. So I have to wrap this up because Black History School is calling today. We're having our Black History movie night. The kids wanted to watch the Ruby Bridges movie, so we're going to watch the Ruby Bridges movie and have a brief discussion about that. But our activity for the Black History movie night is we are holding the city of Ocoee, Florida, on trial for the massacre of the Black residents that lived there in the back in the days in the 1900s, right? So that's part of our activity for today for our Black History movie night. So I got to go ahead and get ready for that. But we're watching the Ruby Bridges movie, and we are holding the city of Ocoee, Florida, on trial for its massacre of its Black citizens. And our Black History movie night will start at 6 p.m. If you're in the Tallahassee area, we will be at the Carter's Corner, 1349 East Lafayette Street, Carter's Corner. We're going to be there starting at 6 o'clock. So make sure y'all check us out if you're in the Tallahassee area. Ricardo Float says, I often ask BFS who are self-hating, Black folks who are self-hating, and there's many. If it's known that white folks aren't first on this earth, why use their description? And right, yeah. I mean, but it's implemented within the soul and the psyche and the fabric of this racist America that we live in. So that's how the system of white supremacy continues. Sacred Seat TV, that's Tiffany's handle. Make sure y'all go check out anything you got going on. Put them in the description. Put them in the comments. Remember, like this video, comment, subscribe, share. I got to get up out of here. But I love you all, and I catch y'all next Saturday. Peace out.